Truss is expected to announce a massive energy bailout tomorrow as she sets about helping struggling households and businesses cope with soaring energy prices. The new PM reportedly planning to freeze bills at £2,500 a year alongside the one-off £400 payment already announced, and it will be funded through government borrowing. Now, a political consensus has formed among Labour and the Tory party, as well as most commentators and journalists, that some form of bailout is needed. But with the cost of this plan expected to reach £150 billion, is this really the best solution, especially with the enormous pandemic bill we've already foolishly racked up? Well, top economist Sam Ashworth-Hayes slammed the idea, calling the Conservatives the Labour Party actually on a 5-year lag. In a column for The Spectator, he argued it's not practical. Nothing in the policy is actually going to make it easier to keep the lights on. And once implemented, a price cap will be incredibly hard to remove. Can you really see politicians deciding to triple prices next year? They're more likely to just go ahead with full nationalisation of the energy sector. But what do you think? With what you know, is Liz Truss's energy price cap wrong? You can email me, Dan at gbnews.uk, tweet me your thoughts at gbnews. We've got our poll running there too. I'm very interested in the results now. But here to help you make up your mind, I am joined by Sam Ashworth-Hayes himself, along with social commentator James Melville, the Chief Operating Officer and Energy Analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Andy Mayer, and former Special Advisor to Boris Johnson and Theresa May, Lilah Howson-Smith. So, Sam, I was so delighted to read your column, actually, because it always concerns me when a policy is being nodded through by the vast majority of the media, by every major political party. I feel, Sam, this is a bit like the furlough scheme or lockdowns. No one is actually scrutinising the details because of the fact we know something needs to be done. So explain, Sam, why you think this policy is wrong.
I mean, I don't just think it's wrong. I think it's almost the worst possible way you could do this. I think there's broad consensus that you need to give some support to households. There's broad consensus that you need to give some support to businesses. But there's also, if you ask basically any economist, they will tell you that this support needs to preserve price signals, because prices are what allow markets to match supply to demand and to give people incentives to reduce their use. If you cap prices below the actual market price, substantially below the actual market price, you're basically creating a situation where demand won't change significantly, and you're going to have to find other ways of sort of making those two match up. So it's an extremely inefficient way of doing it. And it's also vastly costly because you're basically throwing money at households with more money going to the wealthiest who use more already, rather than sort of giving more targeted support.
Lilah Howson-Smith, I know that you are pro this plan, as are most people in your Conservative Party. But can you understand what Sam is saying, that actually there's a lot of us who probably could cut back on our electricity use over the winter while being perfectly safe, but actually the price cap might make us stop doing that. So it actually makes the prospect of blackouts more likely.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the political challenge that Truss faced immediately on coming to power is that she had to do something big and she had to do something quickly. And you see her pragmatism coming through here, and I think that's been an underplayed part of her political character and probably her premiership. She needs to do something. She needs to do it quickly, and it needs to look at this stage as universal or as inclusive as possible to see off the criticisms that what she's doing is not enough. What needs to come after this, and I hope to see this signalled in the statement tomorrow, is this is a temporary fix. Yeah. What comes next? How do you bring back those sort of price signals that you need to manage demand? And how do you think about better targeting this? I'm slightly concerned by reports that it's going to be in place for 18 months. I think that's far too long. But, if this is a policy that's a 6-month stopgap to help us get to a better solution, to think a bit more about energy market reform, clearly that's positive.
Lilah, you're a former special advisor to Boris Johnson and Theresa May. You know what the 18 months is about. This is a plan to take Truss up to the next general election, isn't it? Yeah,
I think you can obviously see the political expediency here, but I think what I'm looking for, and particularly from Jacob Rees-Mogg as her new business secretary, is somebody who is a bit more pro-markets, who's going to push her to look for those market solutions. I think he needs to be leaning on her now to say, this is fine for now, but actually going into the next election, this plan is going to fall apart, not only because it's not sufficiently targeted, but also because of the cost to
Because Andy
public
May,
debt.
you're the perfect person to speak to about this. You're an energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and you have huge concern, don't you, about the long-term ramifications of this sort of intervention into the energy market?
Well, that's right. And what we're looking at here is not just an energy price cap. This is the start of the government, once again, a superficially conservative government, moving the Overton window to the left. This is Liz Truss, who's been branded as a radical free marketeer, exercising one of the largest examples of socialism in our country's history. And not just socialism, but the worst kind of industrial socialism, where we are moving across vast resources from future taxpayers to energy companies. It's not going to the households. It's going to be going to all those companies that have been being demonised for the last few years on the basis they make too much money. Well, now the government's underwriting that. It's saying it doesn't matter how efficient you are, how good you are at your jobs, we're going to underwrite your bills, and just so that we can keep the headline price down. And in that regard, for the future, it means that Labour will be able to say, well, what about subsidising food? What about subsidising transport? The long-term cost of this could be absolutely enormous, not just the policy itself.
Andy, can you understand why Liz Truss feels this is her only option? I mean, if you were advising her, what else would be politically palatable in this climate?
Well, I understand. I mean, the job of politicians is to get elected. The job of economists is to tell them why they shouldn't be. And in Liz's case, she's looking at this enormously difficult sales pitch saying, actually, we need to be straight with you. We need to come to an agreement that we're going to help people who need the money, people who are facing a choice between heating and eating, businesses who are looking at bills that will put them out of business, and we're going to help you. But if you're somebody who at the moment is looking at this possibly impacting your skiing holiday, or if you're Sam Laidlaw, the ex-CEO of Centrica, who was in the papers back in 2013 for having 2 swimming pools, we want you to turn those swimming pools off. We want you to save the energy. We don't want to be burning gas that we don't have enough of in order to pretend that we're richer than we are.
I mean, James Melville, I actually have a big issue with the fact that I might receive an energy subsidy, for example, tomorrow. I think someone like me can shoulder the burden. I would gladly accept the tax cuts, but I don't think I need a subsidy on my energy bill. You agree, James, with Starmer that the only way to fund this is through a windfall tax?
I think it's a number of measures that should be done in the short term. I think there's 2 aspects to this. There's protecting households through the winter and then also protecting businesses. And in particular, if you don't protect businesses, then you're going to have a bigger economic problem. There's going to be more job losses. It's going to cause a decrease in taxation and so on. So I think there is a need. It's partially political for Truss, but it's also just economic basic necessities to get through the winter. It does feel a bit like throwing stuff at the wall and hoping something sticks, when we have been through a lot of that in the last 2 years, me and you, Dan, have talked about. But the second point is critical. We need a proper energy strategy, both in terms of pricing and supply. Not just this government, but successive government before that haven't had an energy supply strategy. And it's ludicrous, considering on this small island of ours, where we have numerous resources of energy sources, we don't have an energy supply. We need a national conversation about what the supply is, what the ownership is, less reliance on foreign ownership of energy. And then there was a discussion that has to come in about nuclear power, for instance, like the French, and also nationalising energy.
Though, I have the faith that Liz Truss does have that medium and long-term plan. The issue is now. And Sam Ashworth-Hayes, there was something that you wrote that actually terrified me after the past 2 years, because I actually think it's possible. You say, at this rate, it could only be potentially a few more weeks before some bright spark starts suggesting energy lockdowns to preserve electricity for our NHS. And that becomes more likely under this plan because actually we're still facing potential blackouts.
Yeah, so this plan, as currently sort of formulated, does a particularly wonderful thing where it subsidises demand for households. They're talking about sort of possibly capping price for business as well, subsidising business demand. So you have the Treasury spending something in the region of 170 billion between the 2 schemes, subsidising demand on both sides. You're not actually able, unless you're going to make the British government the marginal buyer of energy in Europe sort of on an endless basis, there's not always going to be sufficient. So that makes blackouts more likely under this scheme than that would be under the alternative. And I was being slightly facetious, but it's also the sort of idea which you can see someone coming up with, sort of energy rationing as a way of doing it, rather than just letting prices do
Well, no,
their work.
absolutely you can. I mean, look at what's going on in Germany. And I guess that's the issue, Lilah Howson-Smith. Yes, this is politically sensible, you could argue, at this moment in time. But what happens if in January or February we are genuinely facing a blackout situation? How does the government, how does Truss sell the idea of rationing to the public?
So I think there's two things that we're looking for here. The first is fundamentally energy market reform. So that's making sure that, the cost of generating electricity isn't set by the wholesale gas price as it now is. So we can have a kind of more representative energy market. And I think the second here is that she needs to set out a more robust energy security strategy than Boris Johnson managed to do.
Oh, yeah. But she will do that. I don't have any doubt that she will do that. I guess what the concern is, Lilah, from a political point of view, is that at the start of the Tory leadership campaign, Truss was absolutely adamant that handouts and this sort of state intervention were not something that she was going to do. So how come so much has changed in just 6 weeks?
Well, I think what we've seen is her pivot from campaign mode, from appealing just to Conservative members, to her appealing to the voting public. And I think she's somewhat boxed in here by the fact that industry has been making suggestions around freezing prices for however long.
And Starmer, of course, too.
Yeah, and Starmer as well. And actually, she knows to get through the next few weeks in terms of retaining that public support and making sure she's able to build on that and giving her a sort of firm political authority to then make the sort of tougher decisions or come forward with the priorities that she outlined in the leadership campaign. She needs to get this right now. Maybe that means also kind of coming back to it in the future, looking again at energy security and energy supply. But she needs to get past these first early weeks. And actually, unless she announces a really big, significant package that looks like it's going to work for most people, she's just not going to get the space to do that. And I think that's what she's looking to do.
So, Andy Mayer, look, if she called you in and said, look, I want to know what the Institute of Economic Affairs thinks I should do, what would you propose to Truss? Because something has to be done, doesn't it? Something has to be done to protect households who are facing bankruptcy and businesses who are facing closure this winter because of the energy prices.
So on the demand side, we'd say use what you've got. You've got existing welfare measures like universal credit and the warm home discount. Those could be substantially increased to get help to where it's needed. About
so
5 million
increase
households.
benefits rather than cap energy prices.
Yeah, so that's on the welfare side. Tax cuts, cut income tax, cut employers' national insurance or employee national insurance. Do cut VAT off fuel bills. All of those things will get more money into people's pockets, and it's up to them then to decide whether they want to spend that on the much more expensive energy or indeed do other things. It would reward people who actually invested in energy insulation and other efficiency measures. For businesses, cut business rates. There are other things that could be done to help businesses who can pass on some of this, but not everybody can. And just generally, it's much more efficient to leave the high prices, but give people the means to be able to pay them so that there's that pressure on energy to get demand down and to invest in new sources of supply.
So, James Melville, according to Andy Mayer, there is a way to do this without massive state intervention, without a windfall tax.
Yeah, no, I think it's a combination of things. I think there is a need for a windfall tax because I think basically what's happening in terms of pricing is out of control. But I agree with the last point as well. I've said this before. I said that there needs to be almost like a great reset, a terrible phrase, on taxation in the short term.
No, stop.
But there has to be, in terms of taxation, I think all the points are valid. I think there needs to be a cut in national insurance, and that's part of the reason that Sunak lost, because he was heading in the wrong direction to what the Tory base wanted on that. And I think there has to be aspects of to corporation tax to an extent. But in particular, there has to be a lot of aspects whereby individuals are feeling that the stealth taxes are moving in their direction, and in particular VAT, which I'm no fan of anyway. But if you put those taxation policies together, combined with aspects with helping out effectively a bailout package for business and also households, then that gets us through the next few months. But a caveat to that is I am concerned about putting that package together, what that means in terms of balance of payments and also the quantitative easing sums, because in terms of quantitative easing, 500 billion has been pumped into the economy in the last 2 years.
I think what this conversation proves is that whatever Truss announces tomorrow, there is no ideal plan. This is incredibly difficult for a brand new Prime Minister, and we have to hope that her proposal works.